in contrast to peers, I mean, you can look at like Twitter CEO kind of like leaving the company very surprisingly, or like Shopify's head of product leaving. At Facebook, what you see is that this is a very longhand planned change. And you see that there's an immediate successor in place. And with respect to kind of like what's ahead of the platform, right? I mean, when you look at like Sandberg being focused on demand growth and commercial activities, she is kind of like Facebook is transitioning into a period where like the tech focus becomes more into focus again, right? Not only around them shifting into the metaverse at some point in the future, but also with respect to AR features, messenger interoperability. You think about Reels and Stories living across platforms, click-to-messaging functionalities, and a lot more. This obviously requires a lot more hardware infrastructure, a lot of more R&D focus. And Olivan is actually best positioned, given its focus on kind of like cross-platform growth initiatives for the better part of the last decade. Other than Sandberg, he also doesn't have to worry about like HR and legal, which goes directly to Zuckerberg and reporting lines. And I would say this is going to be a very smooth transition for Facebook, and it should actually prepare the platform for what's actually ahead of them in the future.
So Rocco, as you look at the Facebook story, the narrative as it's shaping up right now, they made a lot of waves, Mark Zuckerberg and co over there, about this kind of rebranding and the rebranding taking shape because of this pivot towards Web 3.0, the metaverse, that kind of next stage of what we'd experience as a society with regard to a virtual presence out there. Is this a scenario where you feel as though meta platforms can return to that big growth story that we saw in the early days with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg?
Yeah, I guess that's the $100 billion question here. I mean, Sandberg is leaving during a time, as I said, where Facebook is shifting more into kind of like into a technical innovation period. But she is also leaving at the time where top line upside surprises are harder to come by, right? So if you think about like Facebook or Meta as a platform, having reached peak penetration, both in time spent and user growth. At the same time, you have ad loads coming down based on the transition more into longer form video, especially Reels, while also seeing pressure, on pricing from the transition into Reels, which is more brand focused, but also from all these, from the consumer shift more into services or travel versus product and e-commerce and so on. So it's trickier to actually kind of like generate these top line surprises. And at the same time, with shifting more into Reels and that actually becoming a larger part of consumption time on the platform, this also sits at significantly lower margins. So we're talking about like 25 percentage points or so lower, which means the platform's profitability pattern is changing irrevocably. And Sandberg is likely leaving at the top of that, leaving kind of like Olivan and the others to actually make this change into the metaverse and into all these four major platforms interacting more closely with each other. And this is going to be the task ahead of them.
So, Rocco, I'm going to ask you a kind of an interestingly framed question, but I'm trying to get to a response from you with regard to kind of the prospects for meta platforms. Sheryl Sandberg obviously has a good amount of equity stock in meta platforms right now. Do you feel as though Sheryl Sandberg will want to keep that meta stake going forward, given what she thinks or knows about Meta's future business going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think also in context of a global recession that we are in or that we're gliding into, I would have in mind that some of these big companies, including Facebook, with Facebook having some $45 billion of cash on the balance sheet, while likely generating north of 15 billion of additional cash or free cash flow in this year, they have the resources to kind of like plow through this recession and kind of like innovate themselves out of it. To come back stronger at the end of the day, right? And what we should clearly have in mind is that their metaverse aspirations with that they're trying to set up the platform next to iOS, next to Android, at the third kind of like operating system where they have more control over what's actually happening and how revenue generation is happening. And I'm fairly certain with the amount of money that they're investing, they will get to something meaningful, say by the mid to the end of this decade. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sandberg actually holds on to her stake, kind of like having that in mind.
All right. Really quickly, Rocco, before we let you leave, among those FAANG stocks, which is your favorite?
I'll probably point to Google, simply for them being best positioned to capture some of the TV budget shifting, some of the retail media budget shifting, as well as like search massively benefiting from that shift from products more into services, namely travel, restaurants, and so on. And therefore, I think into the end of this year, this is probably the best positioned stock here.